welcome to the Airline Weekly Lounge. I'm your host, Edward Russell, and I'm joined by my co-host, Jay Shabat, to discuss Ryanair's strong summer earnings and Singapore Airlines' second quarter and the outlook for both. Enjoy. Hey, Jay, how you doing this week?
I'm good, Ned. It was nice seeing you down in Texas last week.
Yes, it was great to see everyone at the Skift Aviation Forum. It was the second in-person event that we've had. Had a great turnout, some good presentations by Robert Isom at American that all of you listened to last week. We'll probably have either Stephen Udvar-Hazy or Southwest CEO Bob Jordan on the podcast in a few weeks. But yeah, it was a good event. Busy, but good event.
Yeah, very much. I in fact went back and listened to or watched all the presentations on our on YouTube on the we haven't posted, and yeah, in particular I watched all the airline CEOs and Udvar-Hazy and a few others. It was yeah, a lot of great info.
Absolutely. Well, with the event behind us, we are still in the midst of third quarter or September quarter earnings season, and we've got two big ones that have gone this week so far. So kick it off. Jay, tell us about Ryanair.
Okay, so Ryanair began the week by reporting their calendar third quarter results. That's the big summertime peak season, and they had an operating margin of 35%, which is that's fireworks, and I don't know what we need to do to celebrate that, but it's that's by far the strongest operating margin of any airline in the world that's reported so far. Probably will. I don't think anybody's going to beat that. Now,
It's
it's
a nice
actually
problem
nothing.
to be very profitable, right?
Very nice problem to have. I don't even know where the word problem came in. There's no problems here, but
Right, exactly. Yes.
there's it's all smiles. But Ryanair, I should say, this is nothing abnormal for them. They actually did a 35% margin last summer for the third quarter, and in 2019 they did a 33%. So basically, this is for them. This is old hat. I mean, this is you know, it's like clockwork. Third quarter comes, summertime comes around, and they just post these extraordinarily high margins. So now the question is how are they going to do in the some of the off peak quarters? Q1 is always pretty tough for them and all the European airlines. Now, in a normal year, their summertime gains far outweigh their wintertime losses, and I don't think there's going to be any question that that's going to be the case this year, and they'll wind up
Yeah, they,
being one
they
of the
they talked about that a little bit in terms of the winter. Ryanair referred to the issues, the supply side issues that a lot of airlines are facing, namely the Pratt Whitney engine issues, maintenance backlogs, and everything. And they said they expect revenues to continue to be very strong through the winter. Aside from demand, which they also expect to remain steady at least, as competitors just can't grow as much, and that includes sort of booming Wizz Air. That's been a real pressure on them, at least in Eastern Europe.
Yeah, that was one of their closest competitors in terms of margin figures and whatnot, and it's before the pandemic, and it just hasn't been the case. Now, Wizz Air hasn't reported yet for this quarter,
That will be
third
later
quarter.
this week. Yes,
Later, okay, yeah, we're talking. That's we should point out that
we're
we're
talking on
talking.
Wednesday, November 8th, and Wizz Air is going later. So, listeners, you will have an idea of how Wizz Air did before you listen to this.
Yep, and I suspect they had a good summer as European airlines tend to do, but probably disappointing relative to previous summers. That's just a guess. I mean, they've just had all sorts of problems, not with just the Pratt and Whitney engines, but I think they're expanding very aggressively in a higher risk way in some of these Middle Eastern Gulf markets, and setting up joint ventures and doing longer stage lengths, which is can be risky for a everybody kind of thinks it's everybody assumes that longer stage lengths are good, because it is true. The longer you utilize an air, let's say an A321neo in their case, you're going to lower your unit cost, you're going to get great utilization, but your unit revenues tend to go down more than your unit cost. And so if you look at Ryanair, their stage lengths are rather short. And yes, shorter stage lengths entail higher unit cost, but you tend to get your the revenue you get for each mile, each kilometer flown tends to be pretty good on some of those short routes. And Wizz Air is kind of diverting from that. So but I shouldn't prejudge their results because we as we're speaking, we don't have them yet. Maybe we'll talk about them next week.
Maybe, but even if the results are good, the amount of growth that they've been undertaking is really getting curtailed. They cut their growth outlook for the second half of their fiscal year, so that's October through March.
This is Wiz you're talking about, or
this is Wiz. This is
okay.
By 10 percentage points because of the Pratt Whitney engine issues. They've got a large A320 Neo family fleet, so revenues they could have done very well over the summer, and yet they're not going to be able to grow the way they did, and that's certainly going to hurt somehow. They've built a business model that is built on strong growth, and not having that is going to be a drag. But that might not have hit during the summer, so we could actually see very good numbers tomorrow, Thursday, and that really won't necessarily tell us how much the issues are going to drag down Wizz going forward.
You see what amazing analysts we are. We're analyzing Wizz Air. We don't even have their numbers yet.
And I realize our conversation is supposed to be about Ryanair.
Yeah.
Anyway, what else did Ryanair have to say?
we actually have some data about them. But yeah, no. Everything we said is interesting. It's also in the context. I just want to let's step back a second. So every European airline that's reported so far, let's say every major, the major ones. They've all had just extraordinarily high profits this summer. It really was a magical summer for European airlines. That's explained by several different factors. Fuel prices were definitely down year over year. You have a lot of capacity that's still, that hasn't come back from 2019 levels. A good example of that is, in Germany, it's still way down. And then you just have all this demand, and not just demand within Europe. But don't forget, even an airline like Ryanair is going to benefit from the extraordinarily strong transatlantic demand that we saw this summer, because there's a lot of Americans, let's say, coming over to Europe. They'll fly to London, to Paris. They'll jump on a Ryanair plane to Greece, to Italy, whatever. That's very common. Yeah. And now you have a lot of Asian, and O'Leary, the CEO, he talks about this in his calls. Even, with Asia coming back now, same deal. Someone will come over from Japan, they'll fly to, wherever, London, and they'll jump on a plane to Dublin on Ryanair or whatever. So they're benefiting for all that. And
I think we've all done that. When I took my kid to Slovenia last year, it was United and Lufthansa over and back, but I flew EasyJet within Europe. So, and
I think the only Ryanair flight I've ever flown is many years ago, but it was from Rome to Tunisia, I want to say. I was like a last minute thing. I was for some reason I was in Italy, and I said, let's go to I've never been to North Africa. Let's go to Tunisia. So I jumped on a flight.
Nice.
I may be misremembering that because as we all tend to do as we get older, but I think that was I only remember being on a Ryanair flight once in my life. But there you have it. So anyway, it was a really, really good summer for European airlines. And the question is, does that continue? Who knows? I kind of think that
Ryanair and the Lufthansa Group are very confident that at least profitability will continue, demand holding steady, supply issues. But like you said, I mean, we don't know.
Kind of feels like we're sort of at the top of the mountain, so to speak. And
as we're seeing here in the US.
Yeah, as we're seeing here in the US, particularly in domestic markets. And I don't think that means we're going to be, tumbling down to the valley like overnight or anything, but, we just may be no longer at the summit anymore. And there's so much depends on, where will fuel prices be over the next 12 months? And, how will the economy be? I mean, there's so many wild card factors, but it does kind of feel like we may be at the top for transatlantic demand in particular. and maybe even intra-Europe demand. So
Absolutely. I mean, we shall
time will
see.
tell.
Time will tell. That is for sure. All right, Jay, with that, we're going to take a quick break and we're going to go to Southeast Asia. And we're back. Jay, so another airline that reported this week was Singapore Airlines. Why don't you tell us the numbers before we dive into some details?
Yeah, and they did fantastically well. Also, not Ryanair 30 plus type margins, but that's just the summertime in Europe type of phenomenon. But Singapore Airlines in the third quarter, calendar third quarter, I think was after fiscal second. Is that right? But
Their fiscal second quarter,
fiscal
yes.
second, right? Anyway, it's what July to September, right? July, August, September is 17%, which is which is fantastic. And they are not a very seasonal airline in that sense. They're almost the opposite of a typical European low cost carrier. Their earnings tend to be pretty smooth over the course of a calendar year. 17% fantastic. And last year, same quarter, they did 15%. Now, if you go back to 2019 in the same quarter, they only did 5%. So Singapore Airlines is definitely one of these carriers that has become much more profitable coming out of the pandemic than they were, I'll say, throughout the 2010s. You can go way back when Singapore Airlines was just famously profitable carrier. I mean, just one of the all stars of the industry, and they still are very much in terms of their service reputation and whatnot. But during the 2010s, it wasn't really a good decade for them. They never lost money, but
Right.
a typical year would be 5%, 6% operating margin. Maybe they'd hit 7 or 8, but it wasn't really a great decade. And I think it really comes down, if I had to, just if you ask me to just choose one reason why, just heavy competition. So much new low cost competition throughout East Asia. Competing against the Gulf carriers and the aggressively expanding Chinese carriers, and on and on and on. But
Right.
now, a lot of that capacity has come out. And I think, as you wrote this morning, Ned, you can,
On Wednesday.
this is Wednesday, right? The some of that capacity is coming back. Is that not correct?
That's right. So, Singapore Airlines, they held a call, which we haven't been able to listen to yet, but I looked at their presentation and, they highlight the fact that they were one of the first to recover capacity in the region Southeast Asia and East Asia. And thanks to that, they're driving some strong revenue growth. They're keeping costs in checks. That's driving profits. But they highlighted one of the concerns that they're watching is the return of competitive capacity. And they had this interesting slide in there that in September, they'd recovered about 83% of their pre pandemic capacity, whereas Asia Pacific Airlines as a whole were only at about 72%, and that was helping them. But that's expected to change as the year ends. We've got AirAsia planning a full recovery by year end. Cathay Pacific is going to be at 70%, and then full recovery next year. And so Singapore Airlines is looking to set themselves apart because they see that capacity coming back. And they've got a number of strategic initiatives. One, of course, is keep costs in check, keep their high quality brand image, maintain that. But others include, boosting connectivity. They highlighted they have 30 plus destinations in China that will be operating in December. Versus, so they had 35, and then I looked in Dio and Cathay, which is traditionally a main feeder for passengers into China, will only have 15 destinations operating, and AirAsia will be at 17. No, sorry, flip that. AirAsia 17, Cathay 15. But it's funny to see this. So Singapore Airlines is setting itself apart, and then also the Air India deal. Once Air India and Vistara merger happens, Singapore will have a quarter of 25% stake in the new Air India. So they're really looking at these ways to set themselves apart and maintain their lead over their competitors. And it is interesting because I remember 5-10 years ago, Singapore Airlines, while they had their image of being a high quality carrier, they were very choosy about who they partnered with. They had a couple equity partnerships with airlines, but they weren't, outside of that, they sort of held themselves apart from the rest. And I feel like that's changing. They're realizing partnerships can be very lucrative to their own success and offering their travelers, their passengers, connectivity across the globe.
Very much. Yeah, they kind of came late to that religion. You're right. They were for many years, oh, we have the best brand in the world. We don't want to we want to maintain our independence. But then in more recently they've been more aggressive about forming partnerships and joint ventures, and even just within their home network. I think they realized there was so much capacity in that sort of ASEAN region, Southeast Asia,
Yes.
pre 2019, that now they're cooperating. They're just like, I think they're just willing to cooperate. They have a arrangement with Thai Airways and Garuda Indonesia
And
and
Vietnam Airlines and
Malaysia,
Malaysia
Vietnam.
Airlines,
It's just
like,
like, yeah, you want to shake my hand? Come on, let's go, let's partner. So yeah, it's much more. They're much more willing to do that. I think you're right. And they've had, they had, they for many years, Air New Zealand and Virgin, I think you pointed out. So they're all in the
yeah.
plan up in Japan is an important partner, Lufthansa, United, et cetera. So that is a big, I think that's a big part of their strategy. And then, yeah, they're now, I mean, Singapore, remember, it's just such a small market. It's a good market. There's business there, but it just, there's no population. The population is very small.
Yeah. And it's
But it
probably
is,
a growing market considering the changes in Hong Kong, the financial center there. I think there's probably been some shift in capital to Singapore, but like you said, it is a small market. I forget what the population of Singapore is, but it's not. I mean, it's not huge. It's 4.5 million. So
yeah,
that's not
half the
even.
size of New York, half the size of
Yeah,
like New
that's the
York City
DC. That's
proper.
a Washington DC area. So it's not huge.
Right, right. So yeah, it's I mean, fantastic geography. Just sits right between India and China, and Australasia's down there, and a lot of itineraries that pass across Singapore, and that region in itself. Singapore Airlines. It's interesting. It was always kind of historically the in a sense like the de facto kind of national airline for all of Southeast Asia, because some of these other carriers like Malaysia Airlines and Thai, it's not that they're bad, but they just didn't have that same. If you were flying, if you're a big business consultant or a banker, or, engineer or something, you're flying, you needed to fly throughout Asia, you would get on Singapore Airlines. And that was
Right.
true for, Indonesia with 200 million people, whatever. And then also it was kind of true for a lot of itineraries out of India too, like eastbound. You wouldn't really fly Air India for many years because their reputation wasn't good. And then that was also true for China too, because China's airlines didn't have their reputation. So Singapore was just, they're even though their home market is very small, it's better to think of their home market as just as a much broader area, encompassing more than a billion
Yes.
people, several billion people. So they've always had that going for them. Now, some of these other airlines, Air India is getting better. Obviously, they're trying to participate in that. Some of the other airlines in the region have improved their reputations and stuff. But it's still generally true about Singapore Airlines. If the premium long haul market is performing well, then Singapore Airlines is performing well. That's always been the general rule. And as we know from countless airlines that have been reporting this season, we know that premium long haul is just like super gangbusters right now. So
Absolutely.
that's been really helpful. Now they have a lot of other strengths too. The
And
incredible
I was like
balance
looking
sheet,
at
low labor
their
costs.
yeah, I was looking at their financial statement too, and Scoot, which is their low cost subsidiary, they're not insignificant. I don't know why I had this image that they were a small player, but they've got seven eight
They've grown it a
sevens,
lot.
and yeah, they've grown a lot. It's like over 40 aircraft. One of the big things they highlighted in their presentation was the arrival of Embraer E-jets that will start arriving next year, and that will allow them to go to more secondary and tertiary cities in Southeast Asia. The E2s have a range of a couple thousand miles, so in theory they could make it all the way, I guess, to southern China. Someone can correct me on the distance there, but that they're talking about just expanding that regional connectivity. They're going to offer more smaller dots to their map, and really just get that connectivity through Changi. And I think that's they're going for that as a competitive advantage.
Yeah, I remember Scoot got a lot of scale when they merged with Tiger. They kind of
Yeah,
fused those two together, so it became both a wide body and narrow body carrier. And then they folded Silk Air. They kind of did away with the brand and kind of, I think that's folded into Mainline now, if I'm not mistaken. But
Right, and
But
just
yeah,
Singapore
Scoot,
Airlines itself, yes.
yeah, but Scoot is it's a sizable player. And it's not. I don't think it's some. It's an airline that's had a ton of success throughout its history. Maybe you'd imagine it's doing better now because a lot, like we've talked about before, a lot of the capacity has been taken out of the region. What Singapore Airlines does best at the end of the day is the high priced premium travel, um, which they could do at competitive prices because they generally have a low cost base, almost like not that dissimilar to what Turkish Airlines is doing over the transatlantic. That's a whole different subject, but they do have that. They still have a lot of cost advantages. Yes, I don't know where Scoot goes from here, but it's definitely a
Well, they're getting those E190
they are
so
getting, yeah.
that's they'll be growing with those very shortly.
Yep. So no, I mean, it's certainly here to stay, and it's probably a useful competitive weapon they have when another low cost carrier from the region jumps on their turf. They can respond with that rather than have to deploy higher cost the heavy metal from mainline. So
Absolutely.
yeah,
I mean, it seems like a good, even if it's not the most profitable subsidiary, it seems like, considering the competitive dynamics in the market, it's an important strategic tool to have, especially when you have AirAsia and others lapping at your doorstep.
yeah, there's just a lot of low cost.
Yeah.
Well, and even, I mean, if you think about even on the long haul end, I mean, if you think it seems to be everyone's doing now. I mean, the two Japanese carriers now have their own kind of long haul, low cost operation. JAL has, what is it, Zip Air, and ANA is starting Japan Air.
Air Japan, yes.
Air Japan. Did I do that backwards?
It's all good.
Air Japan. Yeah, I can't keep track. But so yeah,
too many subsidiaries to keep track of.
Right. And then you have what others in the region? There's I know that's Cathay never did long haul. They purchased HK Express, but that's all short haul still. But yeah, that seems to be it's not uncommon in that region to do low cost long haul.
Absolutely. Well, Jay, with that, we're gonna wrap up this week of the Airline Weekly Lounge. Listeners, you can reach myself at er@skift.com. You can reach Jay at js@skift.com. And please visit airlineweekly.com for all of our daily news, and then subscribe to get access to our weekly issue. Jay, it's always a pleasure.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you for joining us for this week's episode of the Airline Weekly Lounge podcast. Check out airlineweekly.com for a new issue every Monday and updates on the latest airline news throughout the week.